I never thought I'd be telling this story at 67 years old. My name is Martha, and I've spent my entire life being the person everyone could count on. The reliable one. The caretaker. I raised 3 beautiful children, 2 sons and a daughter, working 2 jobs most of their childhood after their father walked out when the youngest was only 4. I remember those years like they were yesterday, waking up at 4:30 a.m. to prepare lunches before my shift at the hospital, where I worked as a nurse for over 30 years. Then rushing to pick up the kids from school, dropping them at home with my oldest watching the younger 2, before heading to my evening job as a home health aide. The exhaustion was bone deep, but when you're a mother you just keep going. My daughter Sophia was always my sensitive one. She had her father's artistic temperament and my stubborn determination. My boys, Thomas and James, were ambitious from an early age. Thomas, now 42, became a successful lawyer, and James, 39, owns a chain of fitness centers. I was so proud watching them graduate college, something I never had the chance to do myself. Sophia would have turned 36 this year. The pain of losing her 7 years ago in that terrible car accident still feels fresh, like an open wound that refuses to heal. She left behind her little boy, Gabriel, who was just 2 years old when she died. His father wasn't in the picture, so taking in Gabriel was the most natural decision I ever made. That boy became my reason to keep going after Sophia's death. Gabriel is 9 now. He has his mother's curly hair and the same dimple when he smiles. Smart as a whip too, always reading or building something. He calls me Grandma. But I've been his mother in all the ways that matter these past 7 years. I'm not wealthy by any means, but I've always been careful with money. My nursing career provided a decent pension, and I had managed to pay off my 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood years ago. I also had some savings and investments that had grown modestly over time. Nothing extravagant, but enough to live comfortably in my retirement and leave something for my children eventually. Thomas and James would visit occasionally, usually on holidays or when they needed something. They were both married with their own families, living about an hour away in more affluent neighborhoods. They'd always comment on how I should upgrade or downsize, suggestions that felt more about what would benefit them than me. "Mom, this house is too much for you to maintain," Thomas would say, while his wife nodded in agreement. "You could get a nice little condo and put the rest in investments," James would chime in, always the businessman. But this house held all my memories, good and bad. It's where I raised my children, where I grieved my Sophia, and where Gabriel had stability after losing his mother. I wasn't going anywhere. Things changed about 6 months ago when I had a minor fall in the garden. Nothing serious, just a sprained wrist. But suddenly my sons became very interested in my health and my future plans. "Have you updated your will recently, Mom?" Thomas asked during a rare Sunday visit. "We should talk about long-term care options," James suggested, scrolling through his phone as he spoke. I brushed off their concerns. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself and Gabriel," I told them. "And everything is in order legally, don't you worry about that." What I didn't tell them was that I had indeed updated my will after Sophia died. I had divided my estate equally among my 3 children originally, but after Sophia's passing, I allocated her third to Gabriel, to be held in trust until he turned 25. Thomas and James would each receive their share, and I'd named my sister Patricia as executor, knowing she would ensure Gabriel was protected. I thought that was fair. They didn't need to know the details. Sunday, April 14th started like any other day. It was Thomas's birthday, and I had invited everyone over for a special lunch. I woke up early to prepare his favorite meal, pot roast with all the trimmings and a homemade chocolate cake. Gabriel helped me in the kitchen, carefully measuring ingredients for the cake while I prepared the roast. "Is Uncle Thomas going to bring Anthony and Lisa?" Gabriel asked, referring to Thomas's children, who were 12 and 14. "Yes, they'll all be here," I said, smiling at his excitement. Gabriel didn't have many opportunities to play with his cousins, who were always busy with extracurricular activities according to their parents. "Do you think they'll want to see my new science project?" He had been working on a model of the solar system for weeks. "I'm sure they will, sweetheart." But I wasn't actually sure. The last few times they visited, the cousins had spent most of the time on their devices, barely acknowledging Gabriel. By noon, the house was filled with the aroma of roasting meat and fresh-baked cake. I had set the dining room table with my good china, the set I only use for special occasions. Gabriel had even picked flowers from the garden for a centerpiece. Thomas arrived first with his wife, Karen, and their children. Karen immediately started commenting on how quaint everything looked, which I had learned was her way of saying old-fashioned. "You really should think about updating your kitchen, Martha," she said, looking around with a hint of distaste. "Stainless steel appliances would brighten up the space." Thomas barely hugged me before asking if I had any beer in the fridge. The grandchildren mumbled hello, then immediately found spots on the living room couch, eyes glued to their phones. James and his wife Heather arrived 20 minutes late. No children. They had decided not to have any, focusing instead on their careers and extensive traveling. "Sorry we're late," Heather said, air-kissing my cheek. "We had brunch with the Andersons, the couple who own that tech company. James might be handling their corporate wellness program." Gabriel tried to greet everyone enthusiastically, showing them the birthday card he had made for his uncle, but was met with distracted acknowledgments. "That's nice, kid," Thomas said, not even looking at the carefully drawn card. I felt a pang watching Gabriel's shoulders slump slightly before he put on a brave smile. "I'll put it on the gift table," he said, placing it next to the elaborately wrapped presents from the others. Lunch started pleasantly enough. Everyone complimented the food, though Karen made sure to mention it wasn't part of her keto diet plan. The conversation revolved mostly around Thomas and James, their work achievements, their recent vacations, their plans for the summer. No one asked about Gabriel's school or my activities. It wasn't until dessert that Thomas finally turned to me. "So, Mom, how are you feeling these days? Any more falls or health issues we should know about?" There was something in his tone that made me uncomfortable. "I'm absolutely fine, Thomas. The garden is keeping me active, and I volunteer at the community center twice a week. At your age, you should be careful about overexertion," James added. "Cardiovascular issues can develop suddenly." I felt myself bristling. At my age? I'm 67, not 97. Your grandfather worked in his garden until he was 85. Times were different then, Karen interjected. People didn't have access to senior living communities with built-in care options. I noticed Gabriel watching this exchange with concern, his fork pushing cake around his plate. "I don't need a care option," I said firmly. "Gabriel and I are doing just fine in this house. Thank you very much." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Thomas cleared his throat and changed the subject to his recent promotion at the law firm. But something had shifted in the atmosphere. I couldn't shake the feeling that my children were looking at me differently, assessing me, evaluating my worth and independence. After cake, everyone moved to the living room for Thomas to open his gifts. He received expensive items, a designer watch from James and Heather, a set of golf clubs from his wife and children. When he opened Gabriel's handmade card, which included a carefully drawn portrait of Thomas and a heartfelt message, he barely glanced at it before setting it aside. "Thanks," he said dismissively, already reaching for the next gift. I saw the hurt in Gabriel's eyes and felt a surge of anger. "Gabriel worked very hard on that," I said. "He spent hours getting the details of your face just right." Thomas looked momentarily embarrassed. "It's great, really," he said unconvincingly. "Very creative." The afternoon wore on with forced pleasantries. I began clearing dishes, refusing Karen's half-hearted offer to help. In the kitchen, I felt a strange sensation in my chest, like pressure building. I dismissed it as indigestion from the rich meal or perhaps stress from the tension with my children. But as I loaded the dishwasher, the discomfort intensified. A sharp pain radiated from my chest to my left arm. Sweat broke out on my forehead, and I felt suddenly nauseated and lightheaded. I knew these symptoms. I had seen them countless times during my nursing career. Heart attack. I tried to call out but found myself sliding down against the kitchen cabinets, the room spinning around me. The last thing I remember clearly was Gabriel's face appearing in the doorway, his eyes widening in horror. "Grandma!" he screamed, rushing toward me. Then darkness. I didn't fully lose consciousness right away. Instead, I drifted in and out, aware of movements and voices around me but unable to respond. I felt myself being moved from the kitchen floor to my bedroom on the first floor. The same room I had converted years ago when climbing stairs became difficult for my mother before she passed. Should we call an ambulance? I heard Gabriel's frightened voice. Let's wait a minute, Thomas said. She might just be overexerted from all the cooking. Mom's always been dramatic when she's tired. Dramatic? In 30 years of nursing, I had gone to work with the flu with migraine headaches even the day after I buried my husband. I had never been dramatic a day in my life. She doesn't look good, Karen said, her voice sounding distant and disinterested. Maybe we should call someone. Let's give her some space, James suggested. If she's not better in a little while, then we can think about next steps. I tried to speak to tell them I needed help immediately, but all that came out was a weak moan. The pain in my chest was becoming unbearable. Grandma needs a doctor now, Gabriel insisted, his voice thick with tears. Gabriel, the adults are handling this, Thomas said sternly. Go wait in the living room. I heard footsteps retreating, not just Gabriel's but the others too. Then, just as the darkness was threatening to envelop me completely, I heard their voices from the hallway outside my bedroom. They must have thought they were far enough away that I couldn't hear, or perhaps they assumed I was fully unconscious. If she goes, what happens to the house? It was Thomas's voice, cold and calculating in a way I had never heard before. I assume it's split between us, James replied. Though there might be something set aside for the kid. That's if she has a will. Did she ever confirm she updated it? Not explicitly, but she said everything was in order legally. Well, if there's no will as her children, we're the natural heirs. The kid isn't blood related to her legally. My heart broke at these words, even as it was physically failing. Gabriel wasn't blood related to me? He was my daughter's son, my flesh and blood, my only grandchild whom I had raised as my own for 7 years. What about the kid? Who takes him? Karen asked, sounding distinctly unenthusiastic about the prospect. There's foster care, Thomas said dismissively. Or maybe there's some distant relative on his father's side. Foster care. Heather sounded shocked, the first human reaction I'd heard from any of them. You can't be serious. What do you suggest? Thomas snapped. We take him? You know how demanding my job is, and the kids barely tolerate him. We're certainly not in a position to take on a child, James added quickly. Our lifestyle just isn't compatible. I felt tears sliding down my temples into my hair. These were my children, discussing the disposal of my home, and the child I loved as if we were inconvenient pieces of furniture to be dealt with. I think we should just let nature take its course here, Thomas said, his voice dropping even lower. If it's her time, it's her time. Rushing her to a hospital might just prolong the inevitable and drain whatever assets are left. Medical care isn't cheap. Thomas. Heather gasped. That's your mother you're talking about. I'm being practical, he replied defensively. Mom's had a good life. She's not young anymore. And intense medical interventions at her age often lead to diminished quality of life afterward. So we just, what? Leave her in there and wait? Karen asked. Give it an hour, James said. If she doesn't improve, then we'll call someone. But Thomas has a point about medical expenses potentially eating into the estate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own children were willing to let me die because they were concerned about their inheritance. The pain in my chest was nothing compared to the agony of this betrayal. Then I heard a small voice trembling with anger. I called 911 already. They're coming right now. Gabriel. My brave, beautiful boy. You did what? Thomas's voice was sharp with anger. Grandma is having a heart attack, Gabriel said, his voice stronger now. I know the symptoms. We learned about them in health class and Grandma taught me too. She needs help right now. Listen here, you little. Thomas began, but was interrupted by the sound of sirens in the distance. Go let them in, James ordered someone, probably Heather or Karen. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Paramedics rushed in, assessed my condition quickly, and confirmed what Gabriel had recognized. I was having a major heart attack. They administered emergency medication, hooked me up to portable monitors, and transferred me to a stretcher. As they wheeled me out, I felt a small hand grip mine. Gabriel, walking alongside the stretcher, tears streaming down his face but determination in his eyes. It's okay, Grandma, he whispered. I won't leave you. I promise. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness completely was Gabriel climbing into the ambulance with me, over Thomas's objections, insisting that I wouldn't be alone. In that moment, despite the pain and fear, I felt an overwhelming surge of love for this child, the only one who saw me as a person to be saved rather than an estate to be divided. The darkness took me then, and I didn't know if I would ever wake up again. But if these were to be my final moments, at least I had learned the truth, painful as it was, about the family I had sacrificed everything to raise. I woke up 3 days later in the cardiac intensive care unit. The first face I saw was Gabriel's, asleep in a chair pulled close to my bed, his hand still holding mine. His face was drawn with worry even in sleep, making him look older than his 9 years. I later learned that I had suffered a massive heart attack, what medical professionals call a widowmaker. The doctors told me that if Gabriel hadn't recognized the symptoms and called for help immediately, I would almost certainly have died. The quick administration of clot-busting drugs had saved my life, though I would need bypass surgery once I was stabilized. Gabriel had refused to leave the hospital. My sister Patricia had come to stay with him in my hospital room, bringing changes of clothes and making sure he ate and rested as much as possible. According to the nurses, he would only sleep when he was touching my hand or arm, as if afraid I might slip away if he lost contact. My sons visited briefly, looking uncomfortable and avoiding direct eye contact. They brought generic get-well cards and flowers, making small talk about the weather and hospital food. Neither mentioned their conversation outside my bedroom door or the fact that their own son and nephew had saved my life, while they calculated their potential inheritance. Thomas attempted an explanation for their delay in calling for help. "We didn't want to overreact, Mom. People your age often have episodes that look worse than they are." I was too weak to confront them then, too focused on surviving and getting back to Gabriel. But I remembered everything they had said, every cold calculation and callous dismissal of the child who had shown more love and courage than both my adult sons combined. The cardiologist was frank about my condition. The heart attack had caused significant damage, but with proper treatment and rehabilitation, I could expect a good recovery. "You're otherwise healthy and strong," he told me. "And you clearly have something to live for," he added, nodding toward Gabriel. As I lay in that hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting me to machines that beeped and hummed, I made a decision. Once I was well enough, I would rewrite my will. My sons had revealed their true natures in what they thought were my final moments. They had shown me exactly who they were and what they valued, and it wasn't me. Gabriel, this child who had saved my life without hesitation, who sat vigilant by my side day after day, he was my true family. He deserved not just my love but everything I could provide for his future. It would take time to recover, months of rehabilitation and careful monitoring, but I was determined to get well, not for Thomas or James, who had been willing to let me die for their financial benefit, but for Gabriel and for myself. I still had life to live, love to give, and apparently some family ties to sever once and for all. Patricia visited daily, bringing Gabriel fresh clothes and his schoolwork, which he insisted on doing in my hospital room. One afternoon, while Gabriel was in the cafeteria with a hospital volunteer, Patricia sat beside me with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something," she said, taking my hand. "It's about Thomas and James." I squeezed her hand weakly. "If it's about what they said when I was having the heart attack, I heard everything." Patricia's eyes widened. "You heard them?" "Every word," I confirmed. "They were willing to let me die to protect their inheritance." Tears filled Patricia's eyes. "Oh, Martha. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said, feeling strangely calm. "In a way they did me a favor. Now I know exactly where I stand with them." Patricia hesitated, then continued. "There's more. They've been talking to an attorney about getting guardianship of Gabriel." My heart monitor beeped more rapidly. "What? Why would they want that? They made it clear they don't want to raise him." "They don't," Patricia said grimly. "But they think you named him in your will. They figure if they have guardianship, they control his inheritance until he's of age." The calculated cruelty took my breath away. They would take in a child they don't even like just for money? Patricia nodded sadly. "Thomas was asking me if I knew details about your will. When I wouldn't tell him anything, he said they might need to take matters into their own hands for Gabriel's welfare, if you're not able to care for him? A cold determination settled over me. Well, they're right about one thing. Gabriel is in my will. But they're about to find themselves very disappointed. For the first time since waking up in the hospital, I felt a sense of purpose and clarity. My sons had revealed themselves as vultures circling what they thought was my deathbed. Now they would learn that this old bird still had some fight left in her. I had a long recovery ahead, but also a plan forming. One that would protect Gabriel and give my sons exactly what they deserved. Patricia, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days. When I'm discharged, I'll need your help with some legal matters. My sister squeezed my hand. Anything you need, Martha. You know I'm here for you. As if on cue, Gabriel returned to the room, his face brightening when he saw I was awake. He rushed to the bedside, carefully avoiding the 4 lines and monitors. Grandma, the cafeteria had chocolate pudding today. I saved mine for you for later when you can eat more. I smiled at him, this precious child who had shown more integrity and love than my own sons ever had. Thank you, sweetheart. I'm feeling stronger already. And I was strong enough to face the difficult truths about my family, and strong enough to make the changes necessary to protect what really mattered. The road to recovery would be long, but for the first time since my heart attack, I felt something like peace. The worst betrayal had already happened and I had survived it. Whatever came next, I would face it with open eyes and a clear heart, with Gabriel by my side. What I didn't know then was just how far my sons would go when they discovered their inheritance slipping away, or how fiercely I would fight to protect what was truly mine. The following weeks were a blur of medical procedures, physical therapy, and painful revelations. I underwent triple bypass surgery 5 days after my heart attack. The procedure was successful, but recovery would be slow and challenging. Every day was a battle against pain, fatigue, and the emotional weight of what I had learned about my sons. Gabriel remained my constant companion. The hospital staff bent rules to allow him to stay with me as much as possible, moved by his devotion and the story of how he had saved my life. One night nurse confided that she had never seen such a bond between grandmother and grandchild. He's more than my grandson, I told her as she checked my vitals. He's my heart outside my body. Thomas and James visited sporadically, always bringing expensive gifts rather than their time or genuine concern. They would stay for 20 minutes, awkwardly asking about my prognosis while avoiding any mention of their behavior during my heart attack. Neither of them ever acknowledged that Gabriel had saved my life or thanked him for his quick thinking. I noticed they would try to speak with my doctors outside my room, asking about my condition and recovery timeline. Once, I overheard Thomas asking my cardiologist about realistic expectations for someone her age and quality of life concerns. The doctor, to his credit, shut down the conversation quickly, reminding Thomas that I was his patient and such discussions should include me. After 2 weeks in the hospital, I was transferred to a rehabilitation facility for another 2 weeks of monitored recovery and physical therapy. Gabriel would come after school each day, bringing his homework and sitting beside me while I worked through my exercises. "Does it hurt, Grandma?" he asked one afternoon as I grimaced through a particularly challenging session. "A little," I admitted. "But sometimes pain is just weakness leaving the body." He considered this seriously. "Like when you get a vaccine. It hurts for a minute but makes you stronger." "Exactly like that," I smiled. "And having you here makes me stronger too." While I focused on physical recovery, Patricia was helping me with another crucial matter. She had contacted my attorney, explaining the situation and my desire to update my will immediately. Given the circumstances, he agreed to visit me at the rehabilitation facility. Mr. Harrison had been my lawyer for over 20 years. He arrived carrying his briefcase, his face grave when Patricia explained what had happened. "I've known your family a long time, Martha," he said, shaking his head. "I find this difficult to believe, but Patricia is not one to exaggerate." "I wish it weren't true," I said quietly. "But I heard them with my own ears. They were willing to let me die to protect their inheritance." Mr. Harrison nodded, his expression hardening. "In that case, let's make sure they don't benefit from such thinking." We spent the next hour discussing my options. My current will divided my estate with Thomas and James each receiving roughly 30%, and Gabriel's trust receiving 40% of my assets. I wanted to change it completely. I want Gabriel to be my sole beneficiary, I told Mr. Harrison firmly. Everything goes into a trust for him, with Patricia as trustee until he's of age. The lawyer nodded, making notes. And if Patricia is unable to serve as trustee? I hadn't considered that. Then my friend Harriet from the hospital. She's Gabriel's godmother and would do right by him. What about Thomas and James? Do you want to leave them anything at all? Even a token amount can sometimes prevent will contests. I thought about this for a long moment. $1 each, I decided. And include a letter explaining exactly why they've been disinherited. I wanted in writing that this decision is made with full mental capacity and for specific reasons. Mr. Harrison looked up from his notepad. You understand they may challenge the will regardless? Claim you were not of sound mind or that you were unduly influenced. Let them try, I said, feeling a cold anger settle in my chest where pain had been. I'm having this conversation in a medical facility with witnesses who can attest to my mental clarity. And you've known me long enough to know I'm not easily influenced. He smiled slightly at that. Indeed. You've always been one of my most strong-minded clients, Martha. We spent another hour going through the details. In addition to rewriting my will, I revoked the powers of attorney I had previously given to Thomas. Instead, I designated Patricia as my healthcare proxy and financial power of attorney. We also set up additional legal protections for Gabriel, guardianship documents naming Patricia as his guardian should anything happen to me before he turned 18. I'll have these documents prepared and returned tomorrow for signatures, Mr. Harrison said as he packed up his briefcase. We'll need witnesses who aren't beneficiaries and preferably a notary public. The facility has a notary on staff, I told him. And 2 of my physical therapists have already offered to witness. As Mr. Harrison was leaving, Thomas arrived for one of his brief visits. They passed each other in the doorway, exchanging terse nods of recognition. Was that your lawyer? Thomas asked immediately, his expression sharpening. Yes, I said simply. We had some business to discuss. What kind of business? He pressed an edge to his voice. You should have told me you were meeting with him. I could have been here to help you understand the legal terminology. I looked at my oldest son, this stranger wearing the face of the boy I had raised, and felt a strange detachment. I understood everything perfectly, Thomas. Mr. Harrison was very thorough. Thomas sat uncomfortably in the visitor's chair, glancing around as if looking for clues. Where's the kid? Gabriel, I corrected firmly, is at his chess club meeting. Patricia will bring him by later. Right, Gabriel? Thomas cleared his throat. Listen, Mom, James and I have been talking. We're concerned about your living situation after you're discharged. Here it comes, I thought. Oh, we don't think you should be alone, especially with a child to care for. It's too much responsibility during your recovery. I won't be alone, I replied calmly. Patricia will be staying with us for the first few weeks. That's temporary, Thomas dismissed with a wave of his hand. We're thinking about long-term solutions. James and I found a very nice assisted living community about 20 minutes from my house. They have excellent medical staff on site. And what about Gabriel? I asked, already knowing the answer. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Well, that's the other thing we wanted to discuss. Karen and I have been talking, and we think Gabriel could come stay with us while you recover. Maybe even longer term, if the arrangement works out. The calculated avarice was so transparent it was almost laughable. A week ago, he had been discussing foster care for Gabriel. Now suddenly he wanted to take him in? The timing, right after seeing my lawyer, made his motives crystal clear. That's very generous, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But unnecessary. Gabriel and I will be fine in our home with help from Patricia and my friends from the hospital. Thomas's jaw tightened. Mom, be reasonable. You've just had major heart surgery. You can't possibly care for a child right now. I've been caring for children since I was barely more than 1 myself, I reminded him. First you and your siblings, then Gabriel. I'll manage as I always have. This isn't like having a cold, Mom. You could have died. In fact, he stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing he was venturing into dangerous territory. In fact, I would have died if Gabriel hadn't called the ambulance. I finished for him, my voice hardening. while you and James were discussing what would happen to my house and calculating how medical expenses might drain the estate. Thomas paled. What are you talking about? I heard you, Thomas. All of you. Standing outside my bedroom door while I was having a heart attack, discussing how you should let nature take its course, rather than get me medical help that might eat into the estate. He shook his head, his expression panicked. You couldn't have heard that. You were unconscious. I was drifting in and out. I heard everything. How you dismissed Gabriel as not being blood-related to me legally. How you discussed foster care for him rather than taking him in. How you were more concerned about my house than whether I lived or died. Thomas stood abruptly, his face flushed. You're confused. The medication they have you on, it's making you paranoid. We were all terrified, Mom. We didn't know what to do. Gabriel knew what to do, I said quietly. He's 9 years old, and he knew to call for help immediately. He wasn't calculating his inheritance. He was saving my life. This is ridiculous, Thomas sputtered. James and I have always looked out for you. No, you've looked out for what I could give you. I was surprised by how calm I felt, finally speaking these truths. When was the last time either of you called just to check on me? Not to discuss my house or my will or my future plans. When was the last time you spent time with Gabriel? Getting to know the wonderful boy he's becoming. We've been busy, he said defensively. Our careers. I raised 3 children while working 2 jobs after your father left. I cut him off. Don't talk to me about busy, Thomas. We stared at each other across an unbridgeable divide. In his eyes I could see calculation trying to determine how much I knew, how serious I was, what this meant for his plans. You've been through a trauma, he finally said, his lawyer voice emerging. We should discuss this when you're thinking more clearly. My thinking has never been clearer, I replied. Please leave now. I need to rest before my next therapy session. He hesitated, then grabbed his coat. This conversation isn't over, Mom. James and I only want what's best for you. As he reached the door, I called after him. Thomas? What's best for me is knowing the truth about the people in my life. So in that sense, you've already given me exactly what I needed. After he left, I lay back against my pillows, exhausted but oddly peaceful. The confrontation had been painful but necessary, the lancing of a festering wound. There would be more difficult conversations ahead, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life and protecting Gabriel's future. I was discharged from the rehabilitation facility exactly 1 month after my heart attack. Returning home was both a relief and a challenge. I was still weak, requiring help with many daily activities and a strict regimen of medications, diet, and gentle exercise. Patricia had prepared the house beautifully, rearranging furniture to minimize obstacles and setting up a temporary bedroom for me in the den to avoid stairs. Gabriel had created welcome home signs and carefully arranged my medications in a pill organizer with handwritten labels. I researched all your medicines, Grandma, he explained proudly. I know when you need to take each one and what they're for. My friends from the hospital, former colleagues who had rallied around me during this crisis, organized a rotation schedule, ensuring someone was always available to help with housework, transportation to medical appointments, and meal preparation. The first week home was peaceful. Thomas and James kept their distance, though Patricia informed me they had called her several times, asking about my condition and making veiled inquiries about my legal affairs. They know something's changed, she told me over tea while Gabriel was at school. Thomas asked if you'd made any rash decisions while in the hospital. I smiled wryly. Protecting my grandson and my assets from people who were willing to let me die strikes me as the opposite of rash. The confrontation I had been expecting came on a Sunday afternoon, almost 3 weeks after I returned home. I was sitting in the garden with Gabriel, watching him tend to the vegetable patch we had started together the previous spring. Patricia had gone to the grocery store, leaving us alone for the first time since my discharge. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway made my pulse quicken. Gabriel looked up, his expression immediately wary. At 9 years old, he had developed an uncanny ability to sense tension and threat, a skill no child should need to cultivate. It's okay, I assured him, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. Why don't you go check on your science project while I talk to your uncles? He hesitated. I can stay with you, Grandma. My heart swelled with love for this brave, protective child. I know you can, sweetheart. But I'll be fine. This is a conversation I need to have with them. Reluctantly, he went inside, though I noticed he positioned himself just inside the screen door where he could see and hear us but remain partially hidden. Thomas and James strode into the garden, both in casual designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly pension. James carried a gift basket of expensive fruits and chocolates, things my post-heart attack diet strictly prohibited. "Mom, you're looking well," Thomas said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Getting some fresh air? The garden is good for healing," I replied, gesturing to the chairs across from me. "Please sit." They exchanged glances before sitting stiffly on the garden chairs. "We've been trying to reach you," James said accusingly. "You haven't returned our calls." "I've been focused on my recovery," I said simply, "and spending time with Gabriel." Thomas leaned forward. "That's actually why we're here, Mom. We're concerned about your living situation." "My living situation is perfect," I replied. "I'm in my home, surrounded by people who genuinely care about my well-being." "But you need proper care," James insisted. "Professional care." "I have that too. My friends from the hospital check on me daily. My cardiologist is pleased with my progress." Thomas cleared his throat. "We've spoken with an attorney about temporary guardianship of Gabriel, just until you're fully recovered." There it was, the real reason for their visit. Not concern for me, but a desperate attempt to gain control of what they believed would be Gabriel's inheritance. "That won't be necessary," I said coldly. "Gabriel stays with me." "It's not about what you want, Mom," Thomas said, his lawyer persona fully emerging now. "It's about what's best for the child." "And you suddenly care about what's best for Gabriel?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "The same child you were willing to send to foster care while I was having a heart attack?" James flinched visibly. "Thomas told me you were confused about what happened that day. You need to understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut him off. "I understand that you both revealed your true characters in what you thought were my final moments. I understand that neither of you has ever shown genuine interest in Gabriel until you realized he might inherit something from me." "That's not fair," Thomas protested. "We've always cared about the kid." "His name is Gabriel," I said evenly. "And in 7 years you've never once taken him for a weekend, never attended his school events, never even remembered his birthday without a reminder from me." "We've been busy," James muttered. "Yes, you mentioned that. Too busy for family, unless there's money involved." Thomas's expression hardened. "What exactly are you implying, Mom?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You and James showed me exactly who you are when I was having a heart attack. Instead of immediately calling for help, you calculated how medical expenses might affect your inheritance. You discussed what would happen to my house and who would be stuck with Gabriel." "You couldn't have heard all that," James insisted, though his face had gone pale. "I heard everything," I said. "And so did Gabriel." Both of them looked toward the house, suddenly noticing the small figure partially visible through the screen door. "That's why I've changed my will," I continued, feeling a strange calm descend over me. "Gabriel is now my sole heir. You two will each receive $1, which is more consideration than you showed me when you were willing to let me die on my bedroom floor." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. "You can't do that," Thomas finally said, his voice strangled. "We'll contest it." "On what grounds?" I asked. "I've been examined by 3 different doctors who have all attested to my mental capacity. The will was witnessed by healthcare professionals with no stake in the outcome, and I've included a detailed letter explaining exactly why I've made this decision." "This is about the money for you too, then?" James accused, his face flushed with anger. "Punishing us by giving everything to the kid." "No, James. This is about protecting a child who has already lost his mother, and ensuring he doesn't fall into the hands of people who see him as nothing more than access to money. This is about consequences for your actions and choices." "We're your children," Thomas said, standing abruptly. "Your blood. And you were willing to watch that blood drain from my body rather than risk your inheritance," I replied steadily. "Blood clearly means little to you, so why should it mean anything to me?" James stood as well, his hands clenched into fists. "You'll regret this, Mom. Thomas is the best family lawyer in the county. We'll fight this all the way." "You're welcome to try," I said. "But consider what will happen when the details of that day become public. When a judge hears how you discussed letting your mother die to protect your inheritance, while her 9-year-old grandson called an ambulance against your wishes." Thomas's legal mind was clearly working, calculating the risks. "No one would believe that." "The paramedics would," I countered. "They documented your resistance to Gabriel's call for help. And Gabriel himself would testify to what he heard." "You'd put a child through that?" James asked incredulously. "I would do whatever necessary to protect him from you," I said, rising slowly from my chair. "Just as he protected me from your callous indifference." I walked toward the house, feeling stronger than I had in weeks. At the door I turned back to face them. "This is my home. I'm asking you both to leave now. You're no longer welcome here." "Mom," Thomas began, but I cut him off. "I'm not your mom anymore," I said quietly. "You lost that privilege when you were willing to let me die. Now get off my property before I call the police for trespassing." For a moment I thought Thomas might argue further, but James grabbed his arm. "Let's go. This isn't over." But it was over. As I watched them walk back to their expensive cars, I felt a finality settle over me. The ties that had bound us for decades had been severed. Not by my actions but by theirs. Inside, Gabriel was waiting, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. "Did you really tell them they're not your kids anymore?" I knelt carefully, mindful of my healing chest, and took his hands in mine. "Family isn't always about blood, Gabriel. It's about who loves you enough to fight for you, to sacrifice for you. Your mother understood that. And now so do I." He threw his arms around me gently, mindful of my surgery scars. "We're each other's family," he whispered. "Yes, we are," I agreed, holding him close. "And nothing will ever change that." It's been 2 months since that confrontation in the garden. Thomas and James did consult with attorneys about contesting my will, but apparently received the same advice from multiple lawyers. Given the circumstances and my well-documented reasons, their chances of success were minimal. The potential for public embarrassment and professional damage was too great. They've made a few attempts at reconciliation, expensive gifts delivered to the house, carefully worded apology cards that never actually acknowledge what they did. I've returned every gift and left every message unanswered. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, at least in this lifetime. Patricia has moved back to her own home now that I'm stronger, though she visits often. Gabriel and I have settled into a new routine. I'm back to volunteering at the community center twice a week. Light administrative work that keeps my mind active without taxing my healing body. Gabriel has joined a science club and a chess team, blossoming in ways that make my heart swell with pride. We talk about Sophia often, keeping her memory alive. I tell Gabriel stories about his mother's childhood, about her artistic talent and her fierce compassion, traits I see in him every day. My cardiologist says my recovery is remarkable. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he told me at my last checkup. "Your heart is healing beautifully." I didn't tell him that the real healing happened the day I cut 2 cancerous relationships from my life. The day I recognized that family is defined not by blood or obligation, but by love and actions. Last week, Gabriel came home from school with a family tree project. "The teacher says we have to include biological relatives," he said worriedly. "Do I have to put Thomas and James on it?" I considered this carefully. Biology is just one way to define family, Gabriel. Put who you feel belongs there. The completed project now hangs on our refrigerator. The tree shows Sophia at the top, with a bright sun behind her. I'm on one sturdy branch, Patricia on another. Gabriel's friends from school occupy smaller branches. There's even a branch for Mr. Whiskers, our recently adopted rescue cat. Thomas and James are nowhere to be seen. Sometimes I feel a pang of sadness for what might have been, for the sons I thought I had raised, for the family we could have been. But then I look at Gabriel, this remarkable child who saved my life in more ways than one, and I know that we have everything we need. My heart attack showed me what truly matters in life. It stripped away pretense and revealed the truth about those I had trusted most. It was a painful awakening but also a gift, the gift of clarity, of purpose, of knowing exactly who deserves a place in my life and my will. I've started a journal for Gabriel to read when he's older, detailing everything that happened and why I made the choices I did. Not to turn him against Thomas and James, but to help him understand that sometimes the most important life lessons come wrapped in the most painful packages. That it's never too late to recognize toxic relationships and have the courage to end them. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Last night, as I tucked Gabriel into bed, a routine we maintain even though he insists he's too old for it, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, are you glad you had your heart attack?" I sat on the edge of his bed, considering my answer carefully. "I'm not glad I had to experience that pain or put you through that fear," I said finally. "But I am grateful for what it taught us both. Sometimes you have to come close to losing everything to understand what's truly worth fighting for." He nodded solemnly. "I'm glad your heart got fixed. Both the physical one and the other one." "The other one?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, yawning. "The one that was giving love to people who didn't deserve it. That needed fixing too." Out of the mouths of babes. I kissed his forehead, once again marveling at the wisdom contained in this small person who had become my world. As I turned out his light, I realized Gabriel was right. My physical heart was damaged by genetics and age, but my emotional heart had been damaged by years of giving love to sons who saw me as little more than a future inheritance. Both had required intervention to heal. I'm 67 years old, starting over in many ways. I have a new will, new boundaries, and a renewed appreciation for every day I'm given with the people who truly care about me. My heart bears scars, both physical and emotional, but it beats stronger now for having survived its greatest challenges. There will be more battles ahead, I'm sure. Thomas and James may try again to challenge my decisions or insert themselves into our lives. But I'm ready for whatever comes. Because now I know that the true measure of family isn't who shares your blood. It's who would fight to keep it flowing when it matters most. And in that most crucial moment, it wasn't my adult sons with their expensive cars and calculated concern who fought for me. It was a 9-year-old boy with a heart bigger than his body, who recognized what needed to be done and did it without hesitation. That's the kind of love worth protecting. That's the kind of person worth leaving a legacy to. And that's the kind of truth that only reveals itself when life hangs in the balance. My name is Martha. I'm 67 years old. And I finally learned the difference between family by blood and family by choice. It took a heart attack to teach me that lesson, but now that I know it, I'll never forget. And neither will my grandson, the boy who saved not just my life, but my faith in human connection. Sometimes the family you're born with isn't the family that deserves you. Sometimes the most precious inheritance isn't money or property, but the love of someone who sees your true worth. And sometimes it takes a child to teach you what a lifetime of parenting couldn't. That love is an action, not a blood type. Gabriel and I sit on the porch swing most evenings now, watching the sunset and making plans for the future. His college fund, trips we want to take together, the garden expansion we'll work on next spring. We talk about everything and nothing. This unlikely pair who found each other through loss and kept each other through crisis. "Do you think they'll ever understand why you did it?" he asked me once, as we watched fireflies begin their evening dance in the yard. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Understanding requires reflection, and reflection requires humility. But it doesn't matter anymore if they understand. What matters is that we do. He nodded, leaning his head against my shoulder. "We're going to be okay, aren't we, Grandma?" I wrapped my arm around him, feeling the steady beat of my mended heart. "We already are, Gabriel. We already are."